Hi.
It's just you and me at the moment. Talking to Marty.
I didn't get a chance to tell you. So that story about the sukkah, it actually happened to us also. We used to belong to a chavara that owned a house in Norfolk, Connecticut. It was found that you might know some of the people who were there because there were people who belonged to Minyan Ma'at. You were at Anshe Chesed, right?
Yes.
So these were people from Minyan Ma'at at Anshe Chesed, and the town was not happy with a Jewish organization taking over another. It was the third nonprofit that moved into the small town, and they were worried about the tax base, and they thought that it wasn't right for us to use the place as a multi-family dwelling because it was a single-family zoning. So they were on our case all the time. The building inspector kept coming, and one day he comes and he sees this sukkah, and he says, "What's going on here?" And he said, "Well, we just need it for this holiday." He said, "Well, we're giving you 15 days to take it down." We had 15,
Nice.
we had 15 days. This was in Norfolk, Connecticut. It was one of many problems. We wound up going to the Connecticut Supreme Court with our case on a number of other issues that they had with us. And but that it started off with that, and they found fire violations and one thing after another. But it really raised their ire when they saw a building going up on our property. I don't know who you knew from Anshe Chesed in those days, but it was like the Mashowitzes.
Yes, my
father.
every Monday.
Okay, so the Mashowitzes were members. Steve Cohen, the sociologist, the one who got into trouble, he was a member of it.
Barry Holt,
probably.
Barry Holtz was not a member of the Chavurah.
Okay.
He is Chavurah anyway. Maybe he was he was made up half from Minyan Ma'at and half from the Harvard Hillel group. So it was like equally inconvenient for both people in New York. It just worked out perfectly.
Right.
Okay. So what are you going to do tomorrow? It's going to be so boring tomorrow, huh?
I'll play golf tomorrow.
How about that?
Okay.
We need to inspire.
There was a talus here.
I've seen one right here. Is this yours?
That's mine. Use it.
Chag Sameach to everybody. And we will begin on page 226. 226.
Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Hodi Hallelujah Selah. Ashrei Ha'am Shekachalo, Ashrei Ha'am Sharei Elohav. סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים וזוקף לכל הכפופים. עיני כל אליך יסברו, ואתה נותן להם את אוכלם בטוב. תהילת אדוני דבר פיו, וברכה בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו ברך ימי אתה בעיר עולם, הללויה.
ובא ציון כבשם פנים, יום אדוני
מפי זרעך, מפרץ זרע זרעך.
אתה הקדוש יושב
אתה הקדוש יושב תהילות ישראל בכרזל הזה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך על הארץ כבודו. ותישאני רוח ואשמע אחרי כה רעש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אדוני אלוהי אברהם יצחק וישראל אבותינו. צדקתך צדק לעולם, בתורתך אמת, תיתן אמת ליעקב. פיתחו באדוני ידי יד, כי בידוני צור עולמים, ויבטחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני. אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה ויאדיר.
Methinks we should just go right to the private Amidah, because I don't think we have even 10.
Excellent.
So we will rise and pray privately, page 242 to 247. 242 to 247. Thanks to Joe Unger for joining us. So we now have a minyan, and so we can turn back to page 242 for the reader's repetition.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'levoteinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, El HaGadol, HaGibor, v'Nor Elyon. Gomel chasadim tovim v'konei Yaakov, v'socher chasdei avotim, v'yigol evnei v'neihem, l'man shemo b'yahava. Melech ozer ufoked Moshiach u'magen Baruch atah Adonai.
Shemo.
Magen Abraham ufoked Sarah.
Amen.
Ata gibor le'olam Adonai mechimetim ata Rab leHoshia. Borit hatal mechakel chayim mechesed. V'chayim mitim berachamim rabim. Somech noflim v'rofei cholim matir asurim. V'mkayim unato liyashenei afar. Michamocha ba'al gevurotu mito melach melech memitum chayeh. Umatzmiach Yeshua. ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני,
Shemo.
מחיי המתים.
Amen. נקדש שם עולם כשם 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 עצמי שם. יחד וקרזה.
נקדש שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב היה נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר.
קדוש 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 שני צבאות מאחורת
כבודו.
כבודו.
ליומתם ברוך יומנו.
ברוך אדוני מקמו.
ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו דברי קודשך כתוב לאמור.
ימלוך הנעלם הקצין לדור, הללויה.
ימלוך אדוני לעולם, מלך ציון לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי המלך הגדול והקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני,
Shemo.
האל הקדוש.
Amen. You may be seated.
אתה בחרתנו מכל עמים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו, ורממתנו מכל הלשונות, וקידשתנו במצוותיך, וקרבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך, בשמך הגדול והקדוש, עלינו קראת. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה, מועדים לשמחה חגים וזמנים לששון, את יום חג הסוכות הזה, זמן שמחתנו מקרא קודש זכר, ליציאת מצרים. אלוהינו ולאבותינו יעלה ויבוא ויגיע, ויראה וירצה וישמע ויפקד, ויזכר זיכרוננו וקטוננו, וזיכרון אבותינו וזיכרון משיח בן אבי עבדך, וזיכרון ירושלים עיר קודשך, וזיכרון כל עמך בית ישראל לפניך, לפלטה לטובה, לכן ולחסד ורחמים, לחיים ולשלום, ביום חג הסוכות הזה. זוכרנו אדוני אלוהינו בו לטובה,
Amen.
ופוקדנו בו לברכה,
Amen.
ויושיענו בו לחיים.
Amen.
ובדבר ישועה ברחמים חוס וחונן ורחם לב הושיענו, כי אליך עינינו, כי המלך חנון ורחום אתה, והשיאנו אדוני אלוהינו, את ברכת מועדיך לחיים לשלום לשמחה ולששון, כאשר אמרת, כאשר רצית ואמרת לברכנו. קדשנו במצוותיך ותהן חלקנו בתורתך, סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך, ותהר ליבנו על עבדך באמת. וינחילנו אדוני אלוהינו בשמחה ובששון מועדי קודשך, וישמחו בך ישראל מקדשי שמך, ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש ישראל והזמנים. רצה אדוני אלוהינו בימך ישראל ותפילתם, בשבט העבודה לדביר ביתך, ותפילתם באהבה תקבל ברצון, ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך, ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, המחזיר שכינתו לציון.
Amen.
מודים אנחנו לך, שאתה הודנה עלינו ולעבודנו. הטוב כי לא חלו רחמך, ומרחם קרירותם וחסדיך מעולם, קיווינו לך, ועל כולם יתברך ויתרום שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד, וכל החיים יודוך סלע, ויהללו את שמך באמת, הישרתנו וזרתנו סלע, ברוך אתה אדוני, הטוב ושמך, ולך נאה להודות.
Amen.
שלום רב, וישראל עמך ויעקב יושבי תיבות תשים לעולם, כי אתה המלך הטוב לכל השלום, וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל, בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל, Bashalom.
Amen.
Yikadav yikadash merabah.
Amen.
Be'amad yivrak yiritev yom lichmachate. B'chayechon v'yemachon v'chedecho bet Yisrael. Ba'agalav yizman kariv yimro amen. Yesh merab barach le'olam l'me'al maya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'jimam v'naseh. V'yitadav v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei kudshah b'richu le'yela mikol b'chata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechamata damaran v'yalma v'yimro amen. Titkabat zolot hon v'aton t'chol Yisrael. Kodam avohon v'yishmaya v'yimro amen. Yesh lama rabba min shemaya. B'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimro amen. Oseh shalom b'imro mav hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol. Latit gedula leyotzeh bereshit. Shelo asanu kagoyeh haratzot. V'lo samanu k'mishpechot adama. Shelo sam chelkenu kahem. Raleinu kechol hamonam, Anachnu korim, umishtachavim umodim, Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Shehu note shamayim v'yosei deret u'mashav yikaron. Al kei nekaveh lecha Adonai Eloheinu lirot mehira b'tiferet u'zechad. Kakatuv betoratecha Adonai imloch leolam vaed. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Bayom hahu yihye Adonai echad. U'shemo echad.
Mourner's Kaddish, page 249. Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei rabak.
Amen.
V'yama divrach hiruteh v'yamich machutek v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael v'agala u'bizman kari v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shmei rabba mavarach le'alam lomei amak. Yiparach v'yishtabach yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseg v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalap shemei d'kudusha
Berichum.
Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata Tush b'chata v'nechamata D'miran b'yama v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shlama rabba min shemai V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom eramak Huya aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. You go first? I'll go first. Okay. Eshekach Hazaka Baruch to Rabbi Stecker. We have our typical 12 minutes between Mincha and Mari. So I thought I would share two Mishnayot from Sechet Sukkah. Mishnah is just so fascinating because it's not quite a law code. It's really where we get a lot of our laws from, but it's so interesting sort of probably what its actual purpose was to preserve things. It was probably kind of a school curriculum, shall we say, and just it was now organized by topic, but within a Mishnah, the topics don't always go kind of in logical order, and sort of you have to sort of read the whole Masechet, and then obviously later have the Talmud's discussion on it to really get the breadth of what the holiday means in this case, and what exactly are we supposed to do. And even the Talmud often has so many different opinions that it's later sages that have to kind of tease out what exactly are we supposed to do. And so it's interesting. I'm not going to do the first Mishnah, but the first Mishnah that begins with doesn't say on the 15th of the 7th month, you build a sukkah, and here's how to build a sukkah. It talks about hayashem tachat mitah. You happen to be sleeping in the sukkah, and you're under your bed. So there's already so many assumptions there that one, part of the mitzvah is sleeping in the sukkah. I'll get to that in a second. And the other is that I guess if you have a bed and you go under the bed, you're not in the sukkah. You literally have to be exposed to the sky. Well, what makes us have to sleep in the sukkah and things like that? So I'm actually going to go all the way to the very end of the second chapter, which sort of gives us the principle of what we're supposed to do. Kol shiva hayamim adam oseh sukkato keva ubeito arai. This is really the essence of how we get to Sukkot. All 7 days, a person has to make their sukkah their fixed dwelling, and their house, their temporary dwelling. And for purposely, those words are used because for 51 weeks of the year, or whatever the rest of the weeks of the year, the house is our permanent kev, our permanent house. And we go outside and build a hut or a tent as some type of a dirat arai, is what it's called, a temporary dwelling. But for these 7 days, we're supposed to make it a permanent one. But what happens if it rains? It gets cold. Now, yes, these people are talking in the Galilee, where the rain season quite hasn't yet come yet. Okay, so but it can come. It's October. Technically, if it were to rain in Israel right now, it would not be abnormal. So it says Yarduk Shami me'ematai mutar lefanot. Okay, when can you start to leave? Okay, mishet tisrach hamikpa. When your congealed dish was spoiled. Okay, so some sort of stew or something like that starts to get a little bit too watery down. Okay, that's when you have to leave. And then they tell a beautiful sort of thing, mashlu mashal. So it's interesting, we don't always get that in the Mishnah, but they made a mashal. A mashal is an allegory. Okay, the maha davar dama. What is the rain on Sukkot like? The eved shabbat lemizog kos lerabo. A servant comes to dilute the wine. We get that word from Passover as well. Their wines back then were very strong, and so you had to dilute it. And you were a free person, obviously an affluent one, when your servant was the one to do it, not yourself. Okay? And what happens? The shafach lo kiton al panav. Literally spits in his face. So it's an interesting sort of idea, but raining on Sukkot is we are eager to fulfill this mitzvah, and we can't. So I'll get to sleeping, and then I'll get to meals in a second. So do we have to sleep in the sukkah, or is that how we fulfill a mitzvah? Remember, this is positive mitzvot, so we're looking for mitzvah points. Whether you do it or not is always another question, and that's where sort of people's sensibilities come in, and people's sense of guilt, which has its own issues. I don't want to address that too much, but like, if I don't do it, am I a bad Jew or something like that? But these are things that we want to strive to do. So sleeping in the sukkah, from what I've gathered, at least when Jews moved to colder climes, there kind of was, I guess, a blanket permission, pun intended, that you could sleep indoors. That it was just going to always be too cold, perhaps too rainy, just uncomfortable. Because the rabbi said we're supposed to be v'samachta, we have to be enjoying this. So this is not supposed to be a burden that one cannot handle. And also now we have more comfortable beds and other things we can argue about, because when it says they're up their bed, what kind of bed did they have? Did they really have most 4-poster beds? They might have just had a straw mat on the floor. So we don't quite know exactly. But then it comes to meals. So what do you do about your meals? So we jump back to Mishnayot and says that Rabbi Eliezer says that we have to eat 14 meals in the Sukkah over the 7 days, 1 during the day and 1 at night. And that's what's the typical, there was 2 meals a day. They didn't really have much of a breakfast. They had a midday meal and then an evening meal. And the rabbis say there's no quota. The only time they really need to try to eat in the Sukkah is on the first day of the festival. And so the question is, when should one strive to eat in the sukkah? When you're eating a meal. Eating a snack, that's sort of the argument. And I've heard some people who say, oh no, I can only just eat some vegetables because I'm not in the sukkah. And if I'm gonna eat any bread or any real meal, I have to find a sukkah. And others say, again, we wanna rejoice. We'll strive to have a sukkah, but if you're at work and you need to eat and you're not near Bryant Park, where by the way there is a sukkah, or anywhere nearby, you can eat inside. So I'm sort of tending towards that of one, don't be guilty when you don't do a mitzvah, be happy when you do a mitzvah, and so not to feel that sense of guilt. And are you I don't have any more. You can find 4, I can find 4 minutes, I can read another Mishnah if you want. I don't know what you're going to say.
No, that's fine. No, it's fine. It's okay. So I was going to say something else, but I won't say this something else. All right, you know what? I'll quickly say this something else, and then I'll say more about it, perhaps. in the next few days. So the weekly parasha that we're looking forward to, I mean, each week we look forward to a parasha. It's interesting that there's never a Shabbat that we read the last parasha in the Torah, which is V'zot HaBracha. So that's the parasha where Moses gives the blessing and Moses dies. And there's no Shabbat that's associated with that. We read it on Simchat Torah. So the last Shabbat that we read Torah was Ha'azinu, and then of course this Shabbat is going to be Shabbat Chol HaMoed, and then the Shabbat after that is already Bereshit. So I just saw a beautiful Devar Torah about how we shouldn't skip over the end of Moses's life, because Moses really demonstrates at the end of his life that despite all of his disappointments, and he had a lot of them, especially at the very end, I mean, he pleaded with God to let him into the land, that nevertheless, the Torah says, Lo chahata'eno, that his vision was undimmed, velo nas lecho, and his strength was unabated. So he managed to maintain his vision, and he managed to maintain his strength. And those who have some connection to the mental health world have probably most likely heard of a psychologist by the name of Erik Erikson, who spoke about phases of a person's life and how in each phase of our lives, there's a basic challenge that we are faced with. And the question is, do we negotiate that challenge? So during adolescence, for example, there's the challenge of identity fulfillment or lack of identity fulfillment. In young adulthood, there's intimacy or isolation. Do you find intimacy or do you continue to remain isolated? And I mean, it sort of sounds like a psychological video game. You sort of get through each level. And then towards the end of your life, do you have a sense of integration, or do you have the opposite of integration? I forget what word he uses. I think despair, actually. That you could get to the ends of your life and just be, we would say, verbissen. You're just bitter. You see people of a certain age. Well, you see younger people this way too, but especially people who've lived. Everything is upsetting. All of their disappointments pile up. All they can do is complain, complain, complain. And Moses seems to have a different model at the end of his life. Instead of dwelling on all of his disappointments, he is able to stand on top of the mountain, look out onto what he won't achieve, but perhaps implicitly be able to celebrate what he did achieve. So just something for us to think about. We don't devote a Shabbat to it, but to think about the end of his life and what it can teach us.
We write on page 281. 281. Baruch Adonai Hamevarach. Baruch Hanan Barach Le'olam Be'ered. You may be seated. Baruch Adonai Hamevarach. Asher Bidrom. El Chai B'Kayam Tamim Nochni Yom Ved Baruch Adonai Hama'arif Aravim Avat Olam Beis From. Al Kedon Elohim. We have a declaration of the member of Cantor Ohevamo, Yisrael, Shema, Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha, v'hayu hadarim ha'elech, asher anochi mitzvcha hayom ala vavecha. V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta b'agn, v'shivacha v'veitecha u'v'lektecha v'derech u'v'shokvecha u'kumecha, u'kshartam liot ayedecha, v'yudotavot b'dinecha, u'chtavtam am zizot beitecha u'v'yisharecha. Asher anochi mitzvcha. Ishim lechem. Bayomar Meshalem. Adonai Elohechem emek. V'yamunu kazov Heavenly Frau, let him Mitzrayim. Asam Mashin v'chayin. Manuchin. B'yam karenin. U'malchut tov ratzon kibulei hekim. Moshe v'nei Chanush Rabbi Simcha Rabav yemru chulam. Mi chamocha b'yemenonag. Mi kamocha nedahar b'kodesh. Narati hilos osei felek. Malchut tov v'necha b'kei yamifnim Moshe. Ze'eli anu v'yamru. Adonai himloch yalaham ba'ek. V'ne'amar ki v'adonai Yaakov v'zakim benu barachat Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. Hashkivein Adonai Eloheinu shnakim. Amideinu makeinu chayin v'chosleinu zukat shlamechem. Ushmor tzeitenu uvoenu lechayim ushalom yitav baruch ataranach shamer ma'Yisrael la'ad. Please rise. Yikadal v'yikadal shemei rabak. Be'alma divra k'yutev machuteg b'chayechon v'yamechon uv'chayed echol beit Yisrael b'galis man kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei b'mavrach v'alam lamet amayek. Yebarach v'yishtabak n'esek v'tatar v'talev t'lal shmei kedusha b'richuk le'ed l'mekutav shiratak shishukatav v'nechamatak Amak v'imru amen. The Amidah said privately 286 to 291. We do the paragraph on 287 for the conclusion of Yom Tov, as well as the paragraph for Chol Moed on 289. Yom Rosh Chag HaSukkot as a you'll just want to do it. Oseh shalom b'mromav, u'ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'yakol Yisrael, V'yimeru. Amen. 294. Yikadav yikadav shmei rabak. Be'alma divrak etimim mechnote. B'chayechon v'mechon. V'chayed echol beit Yisrael. Bagal ezman kariv yimru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehi
Yehi
shmei
shmei
rabban
Rabban
barach.
Barach,
Le'olam
Le'olam
lo mei. Amen.
Amen.
Yebarach mishtabach neseg. V'datar v'talev talosh shmei kedusha.
B'rechu.
La'ed l'mechnotav shiratak. Shukatav v'nechama tadri amav yimru. Amen.
Amen.
Tigabels the home vaton Yisrael. Do hom du shmai yimru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shalom rishamaya b'chayim alin v'koyisrak v'imrihu. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, say shalom miramav huya say shalom alin v'koyisrak v'imrihu. Amen. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol latei kedula leotzer breshik shelo asanu koye haratzok velo hosamanu kushachot hazam shelo sam chelkenu kahem Begohar aleinu kechol hamonakam ba'anachnu kori omishachavim umodik lefnei melech mache hamlakim hakadosh baruch hu.
שהוא לא שמיים ויוסד על הצמשה ויקרא בשמיים ממעל שכינת עוזו בגופם מרומם.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו echad. Page 80, we continue to say Psalm 27 through the holiday of Sukkot. The David Onai Oribi Shimimi Irad Onai Masun. Kis ben neni b'Sukkot b'yom ra'ah.
עתת ביחדיך זרעתי, היית תתשני יתעזבני.
Luhule amanti l'ropa tu b'nai be'eretz chayim. Kaveh nai chazak v'mitzvah v'kaveh el Adonai. Mourner's Kaddish, page 82. Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei rabak. V'yama divra kirute v'yamich machlutek. V'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayei techol beit Yisrael. Bagala uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabban varach le'olam lamei amen. Yiparach v'yishtabach. Yipa'ar v'tramam v'itnasek. V'tadar v'talev v'talak. Shemei dekudusha v'richuk. Le'ela min kol bechata v'shiratak. Chush bechata v'nechamatak. Miran v'yama v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemak. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'ramak. Uya aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Rabbi Stecker is going to do the brief Havdalah that takes us into Chol HaMoed.
סבריר, חבריי, ברוך אתה אדוני למלך עולם, בורא פרי הגפן.
אמן.
ברוך אתה אדוני למלך עולם, המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני, המבדיל בין קודש לחול.
Amen.
לחיים, everybody.
L'chaim. Tomorrow morning, 7:30. Tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. And we say Mo'adim Simcha, Chagim Zmanim Sason during this holiday.
That works. Akut in Moed also, depending on where you're from.
Okay.
Thank you. Good night.